Hi, and welcome to the Ministry Network podcast. I'm your host, James Baird. Today, we'll be speaking with Dr. Justin Holcomb. Dr. Holcomb is a professor at Reformed Theological Seminary, and along with his wife, the author of the book, God Made All of Me. In this episode, we'll be talking about a very sensitive subject, but one that couldn't be more important, and that is how to prevent child sexual abuse. The Ministry Network podcast is sponsored by Westminster Theological Seminary. To learn more about Westminster and their new online programs, visit ministrynetwork.com/degree. Now, let's speak with Dr. Holcomb. Dr. Holcomb, thank you so much for joining us here on Ministry Network.
My pleasure. I hate that we have to talk about the issue we're going to talk about, but I'm thrilled that there are ministries like this that are taking it seriously. So I'm honored to be with you and thankful for the opportunity.
Well, we're so thankful you made some time for us. We're going to talk about a really tough topic today, but a really important one. Can you tell us a little bit about the wonderful book that you wrote with your wife, Lindsay, called God Made All of Me? Can you tell us about the story that led to you writing it?
Yes. Well, the subtitle says it all, How to Help Children Protect Their Bodies. So, God Made All of Me, How to Help Children Protect Their Bodies, is a book about body integrity, but it's really child sexual abuse prevention. What can parents and caregivers, that could be Sunday school teachers, grandparents, it's a wide community. What can caregivers and parents do to help children be protected from evildoers who want to harm them by violating their body, and usually with regard to sexual abuse? And so it came from really because I married my wife, Lindsay, who's the heartbeat behind this book. I helped out a little bit, but she basically, this is her topic. I mean, when I met her, she was a case manager for a sexual assault crisis center. So I'm teaching at seminary and also teaching at the University of Virginia. I'm a minister, and she was a crisis care manager. We'd get together and go on dates, and we'd be talking about her day, and she's telling these horror stories. She's working with a child counselor. She was a victim's advocate. After we got married, she switched to be a case manager for a domestic violence shelter. But the real reason this exists is because of her. I'm kind of riding her coattails. I never thought I'd be writing children's books. I can't believe I have the privilege of doing that. But it really came out of some other projects that we worked on. In 2011, my wife and I, Lindsay, wrote a book called Rid of My Disgrace, Hope and Healing for Victims of Sexual Abuse. And then we wrote, that was with Crossway, that helps people kind of understand theological commitments. Crossway, we all know what Crossway is. If you don't, they're good. And then another book is It My Fault? Hope and Healing for Those Suffering Domestic Abuse, Domestic Violence. That was with Moody. And so we wrote those, and many survivors, family members, and ministry people said, we need these resources. But then we realized that was for dealing with survivors who have experienced it. And we thought, can we go upstream? And in public health, the lingo is, how do you go upstream to, the image is, if you're standing by a river and you see dead bodies coming through, or wounded people floating in the river, you can try to help them and get them out of the river and help them. But you could also go upstream and find out, where are people falling into this river and where this is happening. So you go upstream. How can we be a part of preventing sexual abuse so there's fewer people? And so we have two daughters. Our daughters, right at this time of recording, they're 9 and 11. But we wrote this book years ago when they were like 3 and 5. And we wanted a book that was both Christian in its commitments, but also really good wisdom, just common grace wisdom, because we found some Christian books about generally God made your body, but they didn't address this issue. And we had really good books about child sexual abuse prevention. We thought if we could do that because we're Christians, a lot of the Christian worldview undergirds so much of what we'd want to say on that topic, different doctrinal positions and things that we would say about Christians, makes it even better. We're not changing anything about the common grace. We're just saying, well, because of this about God's character and this is what God does, we have a lot more to say. It emphasizes it. And so we wanted to create that book. What we didn't expect is the book is right on the cusp of selling 100,000 copies. So the idea, we just found out, I talked to my wife just a few days ago and said, "Hun, did you ever think that we would, the idea that there's at least 100,000 kids that have a sense that God made their body and wants their body safe and protected?" And there's probably more. I mean, hopefully each book represents one child, but families usually have, typically 1, 2, or 3. And then maybe those children will remember that and pass it on to their children. What God did with this. I mean, we sent this book around to tons of publishers, Christian publishers. And I don't blame them. I'm not trying to shame anyone. No one wanted to touch this with a 10-foot pole because they were like, first of all, it's children books. Those are hard to pitch. They're expensive to make with all the printing and color and the illustrations. And the topic is kind of a downer topic. We were hoping it would sell maybe 10,000 in its lifetime. And so what we realized is there's a huge need. And we have more books coming out on really, dark issues because apparently that's our specialty, is talking about things that later on we can talk some other time about the one on body image and death. How do we talk to children about grieving and mourning, and what about body? The next one's coming out on body image because we realized talking about how important bodies are was really significant to children. We didn't know how significant that would be. And so we're doing a whole thing on that topic. But that's the kind of story behind where this came from, which it blindsided us. I mean, I've worked on 19 other books, and I think this one is probably the one for which I have a PhD in theology. I teach at seminaries. I've taught at seminaries for 20 years. I'm an ordained minister. I love the fact in God's economy and inverted kingdom that the thing for which I think I'm most known is writing a children's book about child sexual abuse protection, which I love that. It's fun that I get to talk to people about this. So
that's amazing. I mean, when you think about something that would give you a lot of status, it would be the professorship, the ordination, the PhD. But then you look at Jesus's own priorities of the kingdom. He's focused on the children. And so it's amazing that he would bless your work to protect and care for them. I mean, that's amazing.
You nailed it. That's what it feels like, is I never thought when I was going to be in my mid to late 40s, I would be known for writing a children's book. But the idea that children are learning theology that's unbelievably practical, I get that. I have children, and when I see that what they're shaped by in a good way, I'm grateful for those pastors, those teachers, the people that create creative things that teach them about God's world and who they are and their place in it. So I know how much honor and respect I have for those people, that there's some people that would think about me like that as wow, it blows my mind. But it also sounds like, I mean, you nailed it. You look at what Jesus's ministry in children, we shouldn't be shocked by that. I mean, he annoyed people by the way he accepted children and then used that as an example. You have to come to me the way these children come. That's what the kingdom looks like. I get that. That's a little bit offensive, but it also shows kind of the heartbeat of God and what's a true priority.
And even though it's a children's book, as you hinted at, it has some rich theology. I mean, you open the book talking about the doctrine of creation. Can you tell us a little bit about why you started there?
Absolutely. And when I was talking about body image and body integrity and all of that, that's the theological foundation. One, well, a little bit apologetic wise, okay, think about this. We really have a few big options. Either we're, God created everything on purpose and we're the creation of God, or in a completely kind of naturalistic worldview, we are a cosmic accident. Time plus chance plus matter equals here we are. Nature, as Voltaire said, is red in tooth and claw, and survival of the fittest is the way it should be. So if someone gets, if an animal gets eaten, so be it. It's a circle of life. If a child gets abused, I mean, atheists don't support child sexual abuse. I'm not saying that. But the natural tendency of survival of the fittest that's just kind of what happens. And we need a strong gene pool. Or think about the other worldview of something like karma, a karma worldview of pantheism that says, if you're suffering, you deserve it because of what you did in a previous life. And this is cosmic justice working itself out. So probably shouldn't be intervening that much and helping people. And so that's one, is just the major difference is that as Christians, we have this as a deep kind of wealth from which we can draw. And so now that's the apologetic piece. I'm not trying to teach kids apologetics, but the idea that God made everything and it was good is already important because we're not dualists. We don't separate the immaterial part of who we are and the material part. They actually belong together. We're not dualists. We believe in a duality, that there's two, body, soul, or material, immaterial, and they belong together. And that's actually a good thing. So we're not dualists. God, as C.S. Lewis said, God likes matter. He made it. Revelation, you have the picture of the disembodied souls crying out for justice. How long until we can be reunited with our resurrected bodies? But the heartbeat, going back to the main thing about doctrine of creation, is that God creates day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's good. Gets to humanity, and it's good. It's tov. It's very good. There's something about being made in the image of God. So the doctrine of creation was to get to God made this on purpose. He likes it, and he really likes humans, and he really likes your body. He made your body. And so it gives the body integrity. It says the body is good. And too many times Christians have a narrative as if the body needs to be gotten rid of. There's something bad about the body. That's where sin is. And no, sin's in the heart, actually. Sin's in the immaterial part. What our heart loves, the will chooses, and the mind justifies, to quote a friend named Ashley Null. And what that means is that, in a sense, I want children to think that in a good way, just like an artist has their fingerprints on a sculpture, I want children to think of themselves as God's masterpiece, and his fingerprints of care and dedication and concern that's for them, not humanity in general. Of course he cares about humanity in general, but specifically them as an individual. God cares about them. I'm thinking of Zechariah 2:8. It says, "Whoever touches you touches the apple of my eye." Well, the language there for touch is actually harmful touching. The better translation is plunder. And so there's a neat thing that happens when God's telling his people, whoever harms my people, whoever plunders my people, it's like they're plundering me in the most sensitive and vulnerable part. If I were to have a body, the most tender part is the eye. It's vulnerable, it's important, and it hurts. I mean, a little speck of dirt can hurt, let alone sticking someone's finger in it and gouging it out. And so what God is saying is that I want you to know godly good touch that's affirming in the fingerprints of God's love as a creature, as opposed to the plundering touch of the evil one, of Satan, and the tools he uses to plunder God's children. So the doctrine of creation is to undergird the integrity of God's creation, and their body is part of God's creation, and they're images of God. And as images of God, there are some implications for this, that they deserve to be treated with dignity and with respect. And because they are a reflection of Almighty God who created them. And talk about body integrity. Like, if you're a Christian, that makes sense. If you're not a Christian, I love it when non-Christians talk about integrity of a children's body, and that's great. We can amplify that with our doctrine of creation. We can say yes and amen. Let me tell you why it's so important. And we have a great doctrine in the doctrine of creation, the Imago Dei, that undergirds that.
Oh man, that's so good. And it also reminds me of our doctrine of Christ, where I think a lot of us see Jesus as taking on flesh, dirty, nasty flesh, and then getting rid of it as soon as possible. But that's not actually what we believe. Jesus took on flesh for eternity. I mean,
he has a resurrected body. He ascended with for new heavens and new earth. He's going to have a resurrected body. The humility that Christ endured, the covenant of redemption, when the Trinity decided what they were going to do, the Son agreed to take a body, not just for a time, but for ever after that. And that's it. I mean, think about Acts 17, Paul the Areopagus. When he starts talking about his speech there, he ended with, and he did this through Jesus, the man who rose from the dead. I mean, they were so grossed out that God would the incarnation was gross enough to a bunch of Greek thinking, Stoics and Epicureans. They were kind of like offended. He wasn't trying to make a point of contact. He was telling them how different Christianity is. And he said, yeah, God took on human flesh, and then he rose from the dead. And they're probably thinking, okay, he took up a body, but he got rid of it as soon as possible. he took it back up again? Why in the world would Jesus do that? Not only a resurrection, but he keeps it forever. So I think that's another important doctrine that undergirds the integrity of God's creation in the human body.
So you go from this beautiful theological doctrine of creation in your book to then talking about something very specific and very practical. And it's that kids often find the idea of their private parts confusing. And you try to help bring clarity. Can you help us understand why kids find it confusing and then what we can do to help eliminate that confusion for kids?
I love talking about this. I'm grateful that you asked this. Well, just so everyone listening hears, we do have a page in the book which we've been told is pornographic because it's a child in a bathing suit. And why would Christians promote? I think it's a two-piece. We're not promoting, immodesty. Anyway, that's the page in the book where we actually name the proper names for private parts. And we say exactly what they are, just kind of matter of fact. That is the favorite page from children. I've asked parents, hey, what is there a favorite page, image, or words? And 90% of the feedback is our kids love the private part page. Partly because I think they like us feeling awkward saying it. The kids can pick up on it because it almost feels like they're kind of in on the punchline, but also because kids are curious. And so the confusion, it is confusing. This is why it's confusing. And children between the ages of 3 and 8 are who were kind of our main audience, but they already live in the world where private parts are flaunted, shown, don't look at that. They can pick up on that. They see their parents walking around maybe with a towel on, covering them for proper reasons. And so they're just looking around. But the other reason is because too many people give nicknames to their private parts. And when you do that, it's because of the uncomfortability of the parents. When you do that, like, this is your elbow, especially when you're a kid, you figure out how to talk, what's the point of the nose. What's this? Nose. What's this? You're doing that, but you kind of avoid private parts because you don't want to talk about them, or you give them nicknames. And that's confusing to children because it actually communicates this is something for which I should probably be ashamed about because we can't even call it what it is. And that's important. So that's why it's confusing. How to eliminate it is simple, but not easy, which is to call the private parts by their proper name. We're not saying never use a nickname. I know moms are the same way, but I'm a dad. I have a bunch of dad buddies, and I know the nicknames, and they're fine with. I'm not saying never use them, but one reason is because a perpetrator is going to try to turn their private parts into a plaything. They're going to try to turn it into something that is shameful, that shouldn't really be named or talked about. And, come over here, and I don't want to be crass, but like, hey, come over here and hey, what do you think about a pea shooter or a cupcake or a lily? And I mean, it's vague, it's dangerous. It turns it into some vague thing that shouldn't be named. Also, it would be very unnerving if a child were to say, after they learn about, being in charge of touch, and there's inappropriate touch and appropriate touch, to say, don't touch my fill in the blank with a proper name. That's actually going to scare a perpetrator, like, oh, this is not one of the kids to be messed with. And so that's important. And so clearly identifying, telling children, God made all your body and your whole body's good. He made some public parts and private parts, and your private parts are covered by a bathing suit. That's the best way. It's not the perfect way to teach it, but they're covered by bathing suits. And then you name them and explain that no one's supposed to touch those private parts unless it's a doctor with mom and dad there, or mom or dad are trying to help you in a bath. And you explain why anyone would ever. They're off limits. That's yours. And so the way to eliminate the confusion is by saying it, having these conversations early and often. Some parents have children who are, in diapers right now. And my wife would do this. She would, as just changing the diapers, she would say, okay, I'm going to wipe, and fill in the blank. Just part of the conversation. they're not processing that, but it was making my wife and myself, I started doing the same thing. I saw her do that and I thought, that's weird. Are we trying to teach them? She said, no, we're doing this so we're used to actually just naming their body part without being weirded out. And so if you have this conversation on a regular basis, in which it's matter of fact, it's not nearly as awkward, it doesn't need to be. My wife has told people, hey, if you haven't had the private part conversation and they're old enough where it's just going to be like, kind of make you feel awkward, go into your car, roll up the windows, and just say each private part name like 20 times in the row. So you get used to hearing you say those words to your kid. And the other reason it's important for parents is because many parents have either done things with their private parts for which they're ashamed or had things done to their private parts that causes them shame. So most of the confusion is not from the kids. Children don't actually have an innate confusion about their private parts or awkwardness. They're actually curious. A little bit's from our culture, a lot is from the parents. And so if you feel guilty about sexual things or you feel shame for what you've been sinned against sexually in some way, that's going to create some shame that will come through. And so there's grace for that. God can handle this. It doesn't confuse. We do want to be careful and make sure that when we talk about private parts, we explain that private parts aren't touched, but you can actually, there's inappropriate touch for non-private parts. So if anyone touches your body at all, it could be your neck or your face or a leg or an arm. There can be bad, wrong touch, inappropriate touch to non-private parts. But, that's part of the communication of knowing how a perpetrator is working. So what we're doing here is we know the strategies of a perpetrator, and we're trying to help caregivers and parents pull the rug out from underneath the strategies of perpetrators. So naming private parts is a great strategy against them, but it also is helpful for the self-awareness of that child and the application of the doctrine of creation regarding their body.
It's so helpful because I think a lot of parents like to use nicknames to help protect their children from sexuality, which is so easily abused. But it accidentally and unintentionally, it creates a foothold for abusers because kids are curious. They want to understand all their bodies, not 90% of it. And once you create a mystery around these private parts, any person who will explain it to them now has an in with the child because the child will want to know what's been kept from them. And so it's just so helpful to be vanilla, straight down the middle, honest about the whole body. And that's one reason why I love that section. I saw that you're in this small, subtle way protecting children that many people may not appreciate how powerful that one tip is.
Yeah, the children, adults, parents, caregivers who experienced sexual abuse are eager to do this because they wish their parents had told them. And so you nailed it. It is subtle. The book is very vibrant in its color. It's not dark and creepy. It's very, and something, the whole story is actually a story of a family having this conversation. We did that on purpose. We didn't want to make it like there's some animals over there and the monkey has a bathing suit on and it makes it, it's really a boring story in one sense because the story is watching another family have the conversation. Well, that's on purpose because we actually want them, we're showing them this is how we have we're actually having the conversation for them. The book is having the conversation. And so it's like the Inception movie, it's like the story, the conversation inside the conversation, that kind of thing. And so the dream inside the dream, that's Inception. That's the purpose of it, is to get the communication going in the family where suddenly it's just normal to be like, oh, hey, mom and dad, well, what do you think about your private parts? Like suddenly the kids just go for it and start the conversation with their parents.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and I think there's a saying, if you want to help change behavior, make it hard to do the wrong thing and easy to do the right thing.
Ooh, say that. That's so good. Say it for them, but I really want you to say it again for me. Say that again, please.
If you want to change behavior, make it hard to do the wrong thing and easy to do the right thing.
I love that. Yeah.
And that's exactly what your book does. It makes it easy to do the right thing.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah. Feel free to quote me on that.
I will.
Just kidding.
It's like parenting gold right there.
It's really so helpful, and I love the book. And we have a 13-month-old, and my wife and I bought the book to read it just so that we can start getting our head around these issues. As we show him the colorful pictures, he can barely understand brown bear. So it's not for him, but it's so helpful for us to just preemptively start preparing our hearts and minds for protecting our children.
Yeah, good. That's a great idea.
Your book also does something which is surprising, and it's that it actually teaches children that they're in charge of their bodies. You say that they can say no, stop, all done, no more, even to innocent hugs. And when I first read it, I thought, well, that's a good way to make the grandparents upset.
Sure is.
But it's really important, and I'm hoping you can help us understand why.
Yeah, let's talk about touches first, and that'll explain why. Because one of the roles and responsibilities of a parent is to be clear about what is inappropriate touch and appropriate touch. Saying something as clearly as something like, most of the time you like to be hugged and snuggled, tickled and kissed, but sometimes you don't, and that's okay. And let me know if a family member or a friend or someone touches you or talks to you that makes you feel uncomfortable. Now, we don't use the language of good touch, bad touch. It's clunky, it's inappropriate and inappropriate. The reason you don't want to use bad and good touch is that some touch that we would say is bad physiologically could feel good. That's very confusing. That I had a distant family member sin against me in this way, and it was confusing when biologically your body responds to something and you're thinking, is this good or bad? And am I bad because this happened to me? I guess I'm bad, because most survivors of abuse, the first thing they're going to feel is shame. Like, I must have done something to ask for this. And especially a child who doesn't have the kind of just the emotional, bandwidth to figure out navigating that. And so teaching children to say stop, all done, or no more reiterates both the idea about appropriate and inappropriate touch, but also that they're in charge. They're allowed to say no. And what you said about the grandparents is very important, because too many times certain cultures have this kind of, children should just obey anyone, and forcing them to show affection is actually really weird. Let me tell you a story. My daughters, we moved to where we are now. We're in Orlando. We've been here for years. And because our daughter's grandparents are 2 hours north and 2 hours south. And so we have great relationships. Our parents have vacationed together before. They don't argue over holidays. They love each other. They sometimes get together for holidays. And so we thought, we have a good thing. Let's get these girls near their grandparents. And my dad's he's a crier, he's a hugger, he's touchy. I'm a 47-year-old man who still gives my dad a hello and goodbye kiss just because I'm half Italian, so it's just fun. Well, so my dad, when they were visiting for a few days, and he said he was getting ready to leave, and he just said to my oldest, who I think was 6 at the time, "Grandpa's getting ready to go. Come over here and give me a hug and a kiss." And my daughter said, "I don't want to." He has a beard like I have a beard, just scraggly and big. And she didn't like his beard. She didn't want to get that feeling on her face. She said, no, thank you. And my dad said, "Oh, come on over here. I haven't seen you for so long, and I love you and I miss you. Come over here and give me a hug." And I pulled my dad aside. I was like, "Dad, come here, just real quick." I pulled him aside. I wanted to honor him. I also knew he'd get it very easily. I said, "Dad, do you want your granddaughters thinking that when a man begs for physical affection, she should give in?" And he looked at me and he said, "Nope, I got it. It's the last thing I want for my granddaughters. I know I'm so sorry." I'm like, "Dad, don't worry about it. You don't have to," he wasn't, and he walked in and he said, "What do I do then?" And I said, "Offer a high five." So he walked by and he said, "I wouldn't want my scraggly beard either." He said, "Can I have a high five?" And she gave him a high five, and then she ran and dove and gave him a hug and a kiss. But she was in charge at that point. She wasn't disappointing Grandpa. It was appropriate way to respond. And so having the conversations with the family members is important. One, because 35% of perpetrators are family members. 65% are acquaintances. And so having a conversation with the family members of just saying, "Hey, this is important to us. We're trying to teach them that they are in charge. We're not trying to teach them to be disrespectful. They will honor and respect you as their grandparent because of who you are. I want to model to you honoring your parents." And so I'm frequently telling my daughters, "Hey, I'm a grown man, and the Bible says honor your father and mother. It doesn't say you're done when you're 18. It says honor your father and mother. So I honor my mom and dad, but my job is to keep you safe. And so we're teaching our children respect and honor for their parents. But the reason we're doing this is because bad people, evildoers, sneaky people use this tool as a way to harm children, and we want them being confident. So what you'll have when you start talking about body integrity and touch and no touch, every once in a while, if you do it well, one of my daughters a few years ago was on the playground, and one of her friends threw the ball and it hit her in her butt, and she turned around and said, "Don't touch my butt. No one can touch my butt," and just announced the entire playground, everyone there. I am way happier to have that issue that she's going to have that line very clearly drawn. You can also, I practically, this is just a little game and tool that I did when they were babies and children. We would, as many parents know, it's fun to get them giggling, and tickling's the best way to do it. And so we would actually have a tickle game, but the tickle game was a little bit different because I would tell them, because I also learned sign language. I mean, the shaking the two hands is no more, all done. And so if they would shake their hands or say, "No, stop, all done," I would stop immediately. And so I would tickle, and then they would say, "Stop," and I would stop. And then every once in a while, I wouldn't stop, and they would get angry. I wanted them to get angry when I did not listen to them say stop about me touching them. And I didn't do it a lot. I'd go like a few seconds longer, and they would say, I'm like, "I didn't stop when you told me to." And they're like, "I know. And that's not good." I'm like, and so I wanted to have in their memory, when they say stop, the person stops. And I have daughters, so I'm thinking, I don't know when this is going to be useful, but I want to underline their expectation isn't boys will be boys. They're always looking to touch more, kiss more. No. A real man is going to listen to you. A real godly gentleman is going to listen to. When you say stop, "No, I don't want to give you a hug. No, I don't want to give you a kiss. No, I don't want to do that." Like I'm laying groundwork not only against evildoer perpetrators, but also just how they think about how they relate to anyone in their life. And that was the girls actually remember that game, and they talk about it. They realize, they're like, you were teaching us this when we were little kids. I'm like, I was. And so that's a helpful tool for parents if they have kids where it's not weird if you tickle them.
Wow, that's great. And one thing that I'm struck by is, I think this is true for every important thing that parents teach their kids, but it does is probably more for you than it does for them.
Yes.
I grew up in a Southern culture where you do what people want you to do. It's part of how you show respect. It's part of how you fit in. I'd be lying if I didn't say it was part of how you gain status. And for me to remember, hey, actually, in God's providence, I get to direct my energy in the way that I think will glorify Him best. And that He's actually given me that godly autonomy over how I operate in His world. That's a really fancy way to teach what you teach in your book, but man, it did a number on my own heart as I was thinking through that concept.
Yeah, you get to steward that opportunity in shaping and discipling. And I mean, just so everyone hears it, there's some really good things about a culture that's like that. They're a culture of respect and honor and thinking of the other person. Now, of course, there are distortions of that where it's all about status or people pleasing, or the kind of fake Southern charm when you're really behind their back. I mean, there's the dark side of that, but the general disposition of respecting authority and honoring that, those are beautiful things that get distorted, and I think there's wisdom in how to navigate through that.
Join us next time as we continue our conversation with Dr. Justin Holcomb. In the meantime, you can visit ministrynetwork.com/degree to learn about the new online offerings available at Westminster Theological Seminary.